I still remember the exact weight of my phone in my hand when I saw the text. Not the words themselves, those came later, burned into my retinas like staring at the sun, but the physical sensation of holding something that was about to detonate my entire life. It was a Tuesday. Isn't it always a Tuesday when everything falls apart? The quality of the phone case, a cheap, worn silicone cover I'd bought years ago and never bothered to replace, pressed into my palm. It felt suddenly heavy, dense with unrevealed secrets, a small black slab of destiny. The message wasn't even meant for me. That's the thing that still makes me laugh. In that bitter way you laugh when you're 3 glasses of wine deep and wondering how you didn't see it coming. Adam had sent it to our shared family group chat instead of wherever he usually sent his poison. Can't wait for Maldives, babe. Just you, me, and the sound of waves. Mom and Dad are so excited. Finally getting what I deserve. The words, mundane and carelessly enthusiastic, seemed to ripple on the screen, mocking the silence of the room. It was 3:47 p.m. The sun, slanting through the kitchen window, illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, oblivious to the emotional apocalypse unfolding below. What he deserved. I read those words 17 times before my hands stopped shaking enough to scroll up. The tremor started in my fingers and quickly spread to my arms, making the screen swim slightly. The message above it was from his mother, Patricia. So proud of you, sweetheart. You work so hard. This vacation is long overdue. That girl is so lucky to have you. That girl, not Sarah, is so lucky. Not even your wife is so lucky. That girl. Like I was some nameless creature who'd stumbled into their perfect family portrait and refused to leave. The sheer casual disrespect from Patricia was a separate wound, almost as deep as Adam's betrayal. It was the confirmation of every insecurity she had meticulously cultivated in me over 8 years. I should explain something here. I'd spent 6 months planning this vacation. 6 months of secretly saving money from my freelance graphic design work, sacrificing commissions and working late into the nights after Adam was asleep, often fueled by stale coffee and sheer determination. 6 months of skipping lunches, buying generic everything, meticulously tracking our household budget, all to surprise my husband of 8 years with the trip he'd always talked about, the Maldives. Overwater bungalows, sunrise yoga, couples massages. I'd even started learning a few basic phrases in Daivi, the local language, to impress him. His parents were supposed to come to my idea actually, because I thought maybe, just maybe, if we all spent quality time together, Patricia would finally stop looking at me like I was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. I'd harbored a desperate, naive hope that in the shared luxury of a tropical paradise, some warmth might finally thaw the cold relationship between us. I'd booked everything under my name. Used my savings account, my credit card, my airline miles I'd been hoarding since before we even got married, miles accumulated through painful, delayed business travel during my own demanding career before. I shifted to freelance for more flexibility, read, to manage Adam's life. The resort confirmation emails came to my inbox. The travel insurance was in my name. Every single document, every receipt, every reservation mine. I was the silent, efficient engine of our shared life. And Adam thought he was taking his girlfriend. The realization didn't hit me all at once. It came in waves, each one pulling me under a little deeper. First there was the shock. That cold physical sensation of your body understanding something before your mind catches up. The adrenaline rush was so intense it made my ears ring. Then came the disbelief. Surely I'd misread. Surely there was some explanation, a coworker, a business partner, a misunderstanding of epic proportions. But I scrolled through the messages again and again, and each time the truth became sharper, clearer, more undeniable. The words stayed the same, immutable and damning. I sat on our bathroom floor for an hour, phone clutched in my hand, trying to piece together a timeline. The cool, hard porcelain tiles felt grounding, a stark contrast to the swirling chaos in my head. When had this started? The late nights at the office suddenly made sense in a horrible, cliché way. The client dinners that somehow never involved bringing home leftovers, or even a detailed discussion of the client. The new expensive ties. The way he'd stopped reaching for me in bed. Stopped kissing me goodbye in the mornings. Stopped seeing me at all. treating me instead like an appliance he expected to function perfectly. I thought about our anniversary 6 months ago. I'd worn the blue dress, the one he'd said made my eyes look like the ocean, a comment he'd made once. 7 years ago that I'd clung to like a lifeboat. I'd made reservations at the restaurant where we had our first date, choosing the same table, hoping to rekindle the magic. I'd even bought new lingerie, expensive and silky, hoping maybe we could reconnect beyond the comfortable, sexless routine of our shared existence. He'd been distracted the entire evening, checking his phone, apologizing each time but checking it again 30 seconds later, his gaze distant, his smile strained. I told myself it was work stress. I'd made excuses for him like I always did, folding my own needs and concerns into the neat little box of overreaction. How long had I been invisible? Not just to him, but to his entire family. The family group chat kept buzzing, irritatingly persistent, a mosquito in the tropical air I'd planned for them. Patricia, we should get pedicures before we go. Adam, make sure your girl packs light. That resort is so chic. Adam, already packed my swim trunks. Going to hit the gym hard this week. His father, Robert, always the quieter one, a man who spoke only in platitudes and business jargon. Looking forward to the trip, son. You deserve this respite. Not one of them had thanked me. Not one had even acknowledged that I existed. The entire conversation was an open celebration of my replacement. And why would they? I'd become so good at being invisible that even I sometimes forgot I was there. My existence had been reduced to an administrative function in the Adam Richards household. I picked myself up off that cold tile floor and made a decision. Not out of anger, not yet. That came later, a slow-burning fire that would fuel the coming weeks. In that moment, I was operating on something colder and sharper, an almost terrifying intellectual clarity. Call it clarity. Call it self-preservation. Call it the final, brutal realization of self-worth. I was going to let them go on their vacation. But before I got to that decision, I sat there on that floor longer than I should probably admit. The cold of the tiles seeped through my sweatpants, chilling me to the bone. But I barely noticed. My mind was working feverishly, replaying every interaction, every conversation, every casual slight, like they were evidence in a criminal case. Because that's what my marriage had become, a crime scene I had to investigate retroactively, with myself as the forensic analyst of my own emotional demise. I remembered all the times Adam came home late smelling faintly of perfume. Not heavy, cheap perfume, but a light, expensive floral scent. I'd assumed it was just the office, plenty of women worked there after all. A passing colleague. I remembered how he'd started dressing better, investing in bespoke shirts, spending more time in the bathroom in the mornings, wearing that expensive cologne I'd given him for Christmas but that he'd never used before, calling it too flashy. Now it was his daily uniform. I remembered the mysterious phone calls he'd take in the other room, lowering his voice, closing doors with unnecessary care, a gesture that now screamed secrecy. All the signs had been there, blinking neon signs. I'd just chosen not to see them. I had practiced willful blindness as a survival mechanism. Or maybe I hadn't chosen. Maybe I'd been trained not to see them. 8 years with Patricia as a mother-in-law teaches you to doubt your own instincts, to question your own perceptions. How many times had she told me I was being too sensitive? Too dramatic? Too insecure? How many times had Adam echoed those words, subtly, making me feel like my feelings were character defects, rather than valid responses to the disrespectful, negligent way I was being treated? Gaslighting was a word I was now finally, fully applying to my reality. I'd made myself so small, so quiet, so determined not to cause trouble, not to be the nagging, jealous wife that Patricia always implied I could become. I had prioritized the peace of the household over my own dignity. And in the process, I'd given Adam tacit permission to treat me like I didn't matter, like an interchangeable background fixture. Well, that was about to change. The bathroom floor revelation continued as I sat there, my back against the cold bathtub, the phone still glowing with that damning group chat. I started scrolling further back, months and months, looking for clues I'd missed. And they were everywhere, like one of those optical illusions where once you see it, you can't unsee it. The world had shifted on its axis, and the familiar landscape of my life was suddenly revealed as a vast, elaborate deception. 3 months ago, Adam had suddenly become obsessed with his appearance. New haircut at an expensive salon instead of his usual $15 barber. Whitening strips for his teeth. A gym membership upgrade to include a personal trainer named Marco, who focused exclusively on sculpting his torso. At the time, he'd said it was about feeling more confident at work, about wanting to project success. I'd been supportive, even encouraged it, happy to see him taking care of himself. Now I understood. He was making himself attractive for her. He was grooming himself for a new relationship, using me as his domestic backdrop. 5 months ago, he'd started coming home and immediately showering. Every single day, often twice. The office air conditioning makes me feel grimy, he'd explained, his voice flat. I'd thought nothing of it. Why would I? But now I saw it for what it was, washing away evidence, removing her scent, her touch, any trace of their time together. The ritual purification of the guilty. 7 months ago, right when the investigators' report, which I hadn't even commissioned yet, but felt already existed, would say it started, he'd begun scheduling networking events multiple evenings a week. Professional development, he'd called it, essential for his career advancement. I'd packed him dinners to take, worrying he wasn't eating properly with such a busy schedule. I was the dutiful wife, filling his Tupperware with homemade meals. He'd thanked me absently, kissed my cheek, and left. Those Tupperware containers always came back empty. I'd felt good about that, proud that I was taking care of him even when he was so busy. He'd probably thrown the food away and taken her to dinner instead. He'd disposed of my affection and effort just as carelessly as he disposed of me. The thought made my stomach turn. How many times had I carefully prepared his favorite meals, added little notes telling him I loved him, hoped he was having a good day? How many times had those notes ended up in a trash can somewhere while he romanced another woman with my money, my emotional energy, and my time? I pulled myself up from the bathroom floor finally, my legs stiff and tingling from sitting so long. I caught sight of myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. When had I started looking so tired? So faded? My hair needed a cut. I'd been putting it off because haircuts were expensive and we were saving for something special. The something special I'd been planning for 6 months. Apparently, so my husband could enjoy it with his mistress. My clothes were comfortable but shapeless. I'd stopped dressing up years ago because Adam never seemed to notice. Why waste the effort? I'd stopped wearing makeup most days. Stopped buying new clothes. Stopped investing in myself because there was always something more important. Always something Adam needed. Always some way I could make myself smaller, need less, be less trouble. I was the support system, the scaffolding, not the structure itself. Standing there in that bathroom, looking at this stranger in the mirror, I felt something crack open inside me. Not break crack. Like a geode being split to reveal what was hidden inside. The shell of the dutiful, complacent wife was shattering. And what was inside wasn't sadness or despair. It was rage. Pure, crystalline rage that had been compressed under years of being diminished, dismissed, and disrespected. Rage at Adam for betraying me with such casual cruelty. Rage at Patricia for treating me like I was temporary, disposable, a footnote in her son's story. Rage at Robert for his silent complicity. Rage at myself for accepting it all, for making excuses, for trying so hard to be good enough for people who would never think I was enough. But I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't confront anyone. That was the old, emotional, easily dismissed Sarah. The new Sarah was strategic, cold, and utterly detached. Instead, I smiled at my reflection, a cold, hard, dangerous smile. And I started planning. Over the next 3 weeks, I became an actress worthy of an Oscar. The most challenging role of my life. The blissfully ignorant and utterly supportive wife. I smiled when Adam kissed my forehead absently. That perfunctory little peck he gave me before rushing out the door. I nodded when Patricia called to discuss the plans Adam made, even volunteering information about the weather, forecasts for the destination, the actual Maldives, which I looked up meticulously. I even helped him pick out new sunglasses for the trip. Standing in that department store, holding frames up to his face while he checked his phone texting her. I assumed and feeling absolutely nothing. The emotional part of me had gone into hibernation. The nothing was the scariest and most empowering part. I'd been so angry for so long, quietly furious at the little disrespects, the casual dismissals, the way his family treated me like hired help at my own wedding. But now I felt like I was floating somewhere above my body, watching this sad woman go through the motions of a marriage that had died so quietly, she hadn't even heard the death rattle. It was the calm of pure focus, the clarity of an impending strike. During those 3 weeks, I started noticing things I trained myself not to see. Not just about Adam, but about the entire power dynamic. I noticed the almost clinical precision with which Adam would leave the room when his phone rang, or the way he'd angle the screen away from me, even when he was just reading the news. The way he'd started going to the gym at odd hours, 5 a.m. on a Tuesday, 9 p.m. on a Thursday, times that were clearly designed to meet a third party. The way he'd stopped asking about my day, stopped caring about my projects, stopped pretending to be interested in my life at all. He didn't even bother to feign interest anymore. And Patricia. I noticed how Patricia would call me dear in that particular saccharine tone that made it sound like an insult. How she'd comment on my clothes. That's an interesting choice, Sarah, very comfortable, or my cooking. Well, it's not how I make it, but I'm sure it's fine for a weeknight. How she'd correct me in front of others. Small things that individually meant nothing but collectively created a picture of a woman who had never approved of her son's choice and never would. The undermining wasn't subtle. I had just accepted it as normal. At the family gathering the month before, how had I not seen this before? She'd told a story about Adam's college girlfriend. So brilliant, she'd sighed, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. Graduated with honors from Yale. She's a doctor in Boston now, specializing in neurosurgery. I always wonder what would have happened if they'd stayed together. Such a waste of talent. And then she'd looked at me with that sweet, poisonous smile, as if she was just making a casual observation and not implicitly comparing me, the freelance graphic designer, to someone she considered infinitely superior. I remembered how, at our wedding, she'd insisted on making a toast. She'd stood there with her champagne glass, beaming at the guests, and said, "To Adam and Sarah, may he continue to achieve great things, and may she support him the best way she can." The little pause before "support him" had been deliberate. A moment of silence where the crowd was meant to insert the unspoken caveat. Even though she's clearly not up to his standard. Everyone had laughed, thinking it was funny. I'd laughed too, even as something inside me shriveled. And Adam never defended me. Not once. When his mother made these comments, he'd just smile indulgently or change the subject, often with a shrug that said, "It's just mom being mom." When she openly criticized me, he'd say things like, "That's just her way. She's old-fashioned." Or, "She didn't mean anything by it, Sarah. Stop being so sensitive." He always had an excuse, always a reason why I should let it go. Be the bigger person, not make drama. Not make drama. That was the key, wasn't it? Keeping the peace meant swallowing my dignity day after day, until I barely recognized myself. During those 3 weeks of preparation, I also started noticing patterns in how Adam interacted with me versus other people. At work, he was confident, assertive, charming. I'd seen him at company events. He made people laugh. He commanded rooms. He was the kind of person people wanted to be around: dynamic, successful, engaged. But at home with me, he was a different man. Distracted, impatient. I'd begun to feel like I was a nuisance, a chore to be managed. When I talked about my day, his eyes would glaze over and he'd offer non-committal murmurs of assent. When I suggested we do something together, he always had something more urgent to do. An urgent email, a client call, a gym session. When I tried to initiate conversations about our relationship, about how I felt distant from him, he'd tell me I was overthinking things, that everything was fine, that I needed to stop looking for problems where there were none. He minimized my reality until it practically ceased to exist. I didn't confront him. That's what everyone asks me now. Why didn't you just confront him? But I knew Adam. I'd spent 8 years studying him like he was a language I needed to learn to survive. If I confronted him, he'd lie. he'd twist it. He'd weaponize my emotions and make me feel crazy for believing my own eyes.
And Patricia would back him up, because Patricia always backed him up. I'd be the villain. The jealous, unstable wife. The woman who couldn't appreciate how hard he worked and how perfect his family was.
No, I needed proof that would make denial impossible. Not just for a divorce court, but for Adam's own carefully constructed sense of moral superiority. I hired a private investigator. Cost me $800 I didn't have, but I put it on a credit card I'd opened in my own name, one Adam didn't know about. I'd started that card 2 years ago, after Patricia made a comment about how I should really learn to manage money better. It was my emergency fund, my escape route if I ever needed one. My little secret weapon. Turns out I needed one now. The investigator's name was Karen Chen, and she had the kind of face that could blend into any crowd, a quiet, unremarkable competence that was deeply comforting. She wore simple clothes and no jewelry, and her expression rarely changed. We met at a coffee shop across town, somewhere Adam would never go, a place specializing in obscure single-origin beans and pretentious music. I showed her the text messages. I gave her Adam's schedule. I told her about Brittany, the receptionist I'd met exactly twice at company events, both times noticing how Adam's eyes followed her across the room, lingering just a fraction too long. How long do you want me to follow him? Karen asked, her voice professional but not unkind.
Until you have enough proof that he can't lie his way out of it, I specified.
Dates, times, locations, and photos. She nodded, pulling a contract from her briefcase. I'll need a retainer. And I work fast.
My rates reflect that. I handed over my credit card without hesitation, the small act of transaction feeling like the largest purchase of my life, the purchase of my freedom. Meeting with Karen was one of the strangest, most therapeutic experiences of my life.
Sitting there in that anonymous coffee shop, describing my husband's patterns and routines so another woman could document his infidelity, it felt surreal. Like I was narrating someone else's life, not my own. Yet, in narrating it, the reality of it solidified, becoming objective truth rather than subjective anxiety. Corinne asked questions with the detached efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. What time did Adam leave for work? What time did he usually come home? Did he have any regular appointments or activities? Any trips planned? Did I have access to his credit card statements? I provided the details for every account, every appointment, every lie.
At one point, Karen looked at me with something that might have been sympathy, a rare flicker in her professional facade. Mrs. Richards, she said carefully, setting down her pen. In my experience, when someone hires me, they usually already know the truth. They just need proof to make it tangible.
Are you sure you want to go down this road?
Once you have documentation, you can't unknow it. This closes the door completely.
I thought about that for a moment. Could I really? Could I just pretend I hadn't seen that text, hadn't noticed all the signs, hadn't felt the slow death of my marriage over the past months?
The pretense had become too exhausting to maintain. I'm already down this road, I told her, my voice clear and steady.
I'm just tired of walking it alone in the dark.
I need the lights turned on, no matter how bright. She nodded and made a note. I'll start tomorrow. I'll send you updates every other day unless I find something urgent. All communications will be through the encrypted app I'm about to install on your phone.
Delete any texts immediately after reading them.
We need to maintain operational security. The spycraft felt absurd, a low-budget espionage thriller starring a heartbroken wife. But then again, so did hiring someone to follow your husband. So did sitting in a coffee shop planning to document your own life falling apart. One more thing, Karen said as we were leaving. Whatever you're planning to do with this information, and I'm not asking what that is, make sure you're ready.
Evidence like this changes things. It makes them real in a way they weren't before. Make sure you have a detailed, comprehensive plan for after. For when the shock wears off and the logistics set in. I didn't have a plan for after. Not yet, but I would. The photos came back in 5 days.
Karen was efficient, brutally so. Adam and Brittany holding hands outside a sleek, modern restaurant I'd never been to, laughing together with an intimacy I hadn't shared with him in years. Kissing passionately in his car in a parking garage downtown.
entering a discreet boutique hotel at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. The same Wednesday he'd texted me that he'd be working late on a big, sensitive presentation. There were timestamps on everything. Dates, locations, a detailed log of their meetings over the past 2 months, complete with surveillance footage stills that left no doubt.
Karen had done her homework, delivering a package of undeniable, objective truth.
The investigator included a summary. Relationship appears to be approximately 7 months old based on social media activity, his, occasional likes on her posts and her like on all of his, and joint credit card records at various establishments. Subject appears completely unaware he's being observed.
Female companion, Brittany Morrison, age 24. Employed as receptionist at Meridian Office Plaza. No indication subject has attempted to hide the relationship from anyone except spouse. In fact, co-workers appear aware and accepting.
That last line gutted me, not with sadness, but with cold fury. No indication he'd attempted to hide it. Meaning everyone knew. His co-workers, his friends. Probably his parents, given Patricia's casual reference to that girl. Everyone except the wife who'd spent 6 months planning a surprise vacation.
I was the last to know, the fool on the sidelines. 7 months. We'd had our anniversary dinner 6 months ago. I'd worn the blue dress he liked. He'd checked his phone 14 times during dessert. I'd counted.
I didn't cry when I read the report.
Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford.
I filed it away in a highly secured, password-protected folder on my laptop, and I kept smiling, meticulously playing the role of the oblivious wife. But that night, alone in our bed while Adam worked late, or didn't work late, as I now knew, I let myself feel it. All of it, the betrayal, the humiliation, the profound aching grief for the marriage I thought we had, the future I'd painstakingly constructed in my mind. I cried silently into my pillow, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and leaves you hollowed out and exhausted, but also oddly clean.
Then I got up, washed my face, and started planning the true vacation. The vacation was 2 weeks away when I made my move, a series of calculated, precise logistical strikes. It started small.
I called the resort in the Maldives, the actual one, the one I had booked and paid for, and explained there'd been a terrible mistake. My husband, bless his heart, had booked the same dates at a different property, causing much confusion. So sorry for the mix-up. Could we please cancel?
The woman on the phone was sympathetic, offering condolences with that professional hospitality voice that made you believe she genuinely cared about your problem. Cancellations happen all the time, she assured me. Would I like to rebook?
No, I told her, my voice laced with appropriate-sounding disappointment. We'd sort it out and call back. I confirmed the refund details, the vast sum of money flowing back to my personal hidden credit card. The lie came easily. I was surprised by how little compunction I felt. That Sarah who worried about being a good person was dead. This new, focused Sarah was an engineer of consequence.
Then I opened a new browser window and searched for the most remote,
inhospitable, utterly un-Maldives-like place I could think of that still technically had tourist accommodations. I started with Antarctica, too expensive and too difficult to book on short notice. I considered the Siberian tundra, the deep Amazon, the most isolated points in the Gobi Desert.
I needed a place that maximized misery while remaining technically a vacation. It needed to be cold,
difficult to reach, polluting, and most importantly, utterly contrary to Adam and Patricia's pampered sensibilities. That's how I found it. The Landfill Recreation Center in Siberia. I'm not kidding. This place actually exists, built on the site of a former waste management facility outside Norilsk, one of the most polluted cities on Earth due to massive nickel and palladium mining operations. It was attempting to rebrand as an ecotourism destination. Apparently, someone had decided that people might want to visit the site of environmental collapse if you put a positive spin on it and charged a small fee.
The photos on the website were a masterpiece of grim irony. Gray,
boxy buildings against grayer skies. Thin, toxic-looking snow-covering ground that looked suspiciously multicolored, and a nature trail that wound through what appeared to be poorly disguised mounds of municipal waste. There was a museum dedicated to the history of waste management in the Soviet Union, a deeply educational, profoundly depressing stop.
The authentic accommodations looked like they'd been abandoned in 1987 and recently dusted off with a mop.
The reviews were spectacular in their horror. A catalog of human suffering. Smells worse than expected, and my expectations were low.
The air quality rating is 500% over safety standards. Truly a unique experience, and not in a good way.
My husband cried.
I'm filing for divorce and bringing my therapist. The spa services involved a bucket of lukewarm, slightly orange water and a bar of soap that may or may not have been used before. I think the bucket was leaking. Would give 0 stars if possible. The only amenity is existential dread.
Perfect. A vacation designed to strip Adam and his family of their entitlement and expose them to raw, unmitigated reality. I spent hours on that website, reading every review, studying every photo. I spent hours on that website, reading every review, studying every review, understanding exactly what I was sending them into. One reviewer had written a particularly detailed account of their stay. The heated rooms are kept at approximately $13 circ, Tex-C $55 circ, Tex-F $, which they claim is authentic Russian thermal immersion. The plumbing works intermittently and produces water that smells distinctly of sulfur. The food is a mystery. I still don't know what most of it was. The tour guides are relentlessly cheerful in a way that feels vaguely threatening. The smell is inescapable.
It seeps into your clothes, your hair, your very soul. I have never felt such profound regret. Another review. I thought I was booking an eco-tourism experience.
I got a tour of literal garbage, much of it decades-old Soviet-era garbage.
They're very proud of their composting systems from the 1970s.
Very proud.
You will learn more about waste decomposition than you ever wanted to know.
The souvenir shop sells postcards and rocks. Just rocks. Not special, polished rocks.
Just gray, uninteresting rocks.
The booking process was surprisingly straightforward. The website was barely functional. Clearly translated from Russian by someone with only a passing familiarity with English syntax, but it accepted credit cards. I used all the same information from the Maldives reservation, same confirmation numbers where possible. Same confirmation numbers where possible.
Same passenger details. Adam, Brittany, Patricia, Robert. Same dates.
I booked the flights through Aeroflot, routing them through Frankfurt, Moscow, and then a regional carrier to Norilsk. Total travel time, 34 hours.
I made sure to book economy seats despite having originally reserved business class for the Maldives trip. Why waste the money on their comfort?
Let them experience the true meaning of delayed gratification in a cramped, unpleasant setting. The resort itself cost barely anything, about $300 for the week, all inclusive.
I used the money I'd saved from canceling the Maldives to upgrade them to the premium experience, which was, ironically, the absolute worst option. This included a guided, personalized tour of the functional landfill operations, authentic local cuisine, mysterious stews and black bread, according to the description, sometimes featuring questionable meat substitutes,
and cultural immersion activities, which turned out to be mandatory attendance at a lecture on the history of Stalinist-era forced labor camps in the region, a cheerful start to any holiday. I paid extra for the non-refundable, no cancellation option, ensuring their escape route was cut off without massive financial pain.
And I made sure the booking was in Adam's name, with his email as the primary contact, but all the payment information was mine. Just in case he bothered to check his email, which he wouldn't, because he never checked the details of anything I planned. Here's what they don't tell you about revenge. The planning is intoxicating. It is a slow, methodical reclamation of control. Every detail I arranged felt like taking back a piece of myself I'd given away. Every click of the mouse was reclaiming my power. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the architect of consequence.
I spent hours perfecting every detail.
I printed out new travel documents on the same heavy,
embossed paper stock as the originals I had to order it special from an office supply store to get the weight and texture right. I updated the itinerary in Adam's shared Google Calendar using the password I'd had for years.
Another gift of being the invisible wife who handled all the admin stuff. I changed the airline confirmation.
I modified the booking details.
I even created fake confirmation emails from Paradise Maldives Resort, with headers and footers that matched their actual correspondence.
The confirmation emails looked identical to the real ones. Same logo placement, same font, same color scheme.
The only differences were the destination and the airline. Instead of, "Your dream vacation awaits in paradise," the subject line read, "Your dream vacation awaits in paradise." Same words, different, highly toxic paradise. Creating those fake emails took longer than I expected.
I had to download the resort's actual email template, modify it pixel by pixel, match the exact shade of blue they used in their branding. I had to make sure the footer links went to the real website. I couldn't risk Adam clicking through and finding discrepancies.
I had to time the emails to arrive at the exact same time the real resort had been sending confirmations, ensuring they blended seamlessly into his inbox.
It was meticulous work. Obsessive, even. But I found I enjoyed it.
Each tiny detail was a brick in the wall I was building, and on the other side of that wall was a new life.
A life where I mattered. Where I was visible.
Where I wouldn't accept crumbs of affection and call it love.
Would they notice? Maybe. But I was betting on Adam's fundamental lack of attention to detail. His complete trust that I'd handled everything correctly because I always handled everything correctly, and his certainty that I was too meek, too beaten down, too desperate for his approval to ever fight back.
I was betting on his arrogance and the ingrained entitlement of his mother.
I was betting on 8 years of training him to ignore me. During this time, I also started preparing for my own future. My second major project was ensuring my escape. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, one Adam had never used or heard of, specifically choosing a small, local credit union. I transferred money in small amounts, under $500 at a time, that wouldn't trigger alerts on our shared accounts, or raise any suspicion from Adam, who only ever looked at the final balance, not the transactions. I changed my direct deposit information for my freelance work to funnel all future income into this new, secure account. I started looking at apartments online, calculating what I could afford on my own income, establishing a budget free from Adam's controlling oversight. I made lists. Things I needed to take from the house. Things I was willing to leave behind, all the furniture, all the shared possessions, all the ghosts of the marriage. Important documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport, my updated will, which I'd changed to reflect my mother's wishes, not Adam's. Sentimental items, photos of my parents, my grandmother's jewelry, books I'd had since childhood.
Everything else could stay. I viewed the house not as a home, but as a movie set I was finally walking off of. I contacted 3 divorce lawyers and had detailed consultations with each.
I chose Diana Price because she was sharp as a knife, utterly unsentimental, and didn't pretend to be sympathetic. She was a professional warrior, and that's what I needed.
I didn't want sympathy.
I wanted someone who would fight and win.
"This is good," she'd said, reviewing the investigator's report and the financial paper trail I'd meticulously created. "Very good.
Documented infidelity, financial independence on your part, and evidence of emotional abuse, yes, that's what this pattern of behavior from his family constitutes.
You're in a strong position, Sarah. We can argue for a division heavily in your favor, particularly citing marital misconduct."
I want it to be fast,
I told her.
And I want it to be final. No dragging it out, no reconciliation attempts. I want him to know the papers are served the moment he is physically unable to respond effectively. She'd smiled then, a Volf smile. I can do that, Sarah. We will use the element of surprise to ensure his response is purely reactive, not strategic. The week before departure, Patricia invited me to lunch.
This alone should have been a warning sign. Patricia didn't do lunch with me. She did obligatory holiday dinners where she'd criticize my cooking while eating 3 helpings.
She did tense birthday parties where she'd give me gifts that were clearly meant for someone else. But voluntary social time?
Never. This was a preemptive strike, a final assertion of her dominance.
We met at a restaurant she chose, expensive and cold. All white tablecloths and waiters who looked through me like I was invisible. Which I suppose I was.
She ordered a delicate salad with dressing on the side, and a glass of expensive Sauvignon Blanc.
I ordered a massive plate of carbonara with extra cheese because I knew the
sheer caloric density and the rich smell would annoy her refined palate.
Sarah, she said, folding her hands on the table with her enormous diamond rings catching the light.
Those rings had been in the family for generations, she'd told me repeatedly. They would go to Adam's wife someday. Never mind that I was Adam's wife. She meant his real wife, the wife she would have chosen. I wanted to talk to you about the vacation, she continued, her voice lowered conspiratorially, as if discussing classified state secrets.
My heart rate didn't change. I'd practiced this.
I'd known this conversation was coming. Oh, the Maldives. Adam is bringing a friend.
A young woman from his office. Brittany, you understand how important networking is for his career?
Sarah, especially now.
With the promotion on the horizon. She said it like she was explaining arithmetic to a child with intellectual disabilities.
Robert and I thought it would be good for you to make yourself scarce during the trip. Give them space to discuss business matters. Give them some privacy.
I took a bite of my rich, creamy pasta.
Chewed slowly. Swallowed. Let the silence stretch, forcing her to hold the tension. A young woman, I repeated, tasting the words.
Brittany, lovely girl. Very professional.
You'd like her. Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. It was a purely social mask.
She's very ambitious. Very smart. The kind of woman who can really help a man's career, if you know what I mean.
She has connections we simply don't have, Sarah. Oh, I knew what she meant. She was confirming that she was aware of the affair and was actively endorsing it, viewing it as a strategic upgrade for her son. The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow, a sudden rush of blood to the head. She wasn't even pretending. She knew. She'd known, probably from the beginning, and she was sitting here telling me to step aside for my husband's mistress. Not asking. Telling.
As if I were an employee being given instructions, not a human being whose life was being casually destroyed.
I see, I said, keeping my expression neutral,
perhaps a little confused, exactly as she expected.
I knew you'd understand.
You've always been so reasonable, Sarah. So accommodating. She smiled again, a flash of white teeth. This is why Adam values you, dear. You don't make waves. You don't cause drama. You're so low maintenance.
Low maintenance. The compliment men and mothers-in-law give to women who don't ask for what they need, who absorb abuse and neglect without complaint. The compliment that means, you're easy to ignore and easy to replace. Of course, I said, meeting her eyes with a blank, placid gaze. I wouldn't want to get in the way of Adam's networking opportunities. Not for anything.
Patricia looked profoundly relieved, actually deflating slightly. I'm so glad we had this talk. I was worried you might be difficult about it, but you're being very mature.
Very sensible. Robert and I will make sure we keep in touch with you while we're gone.
I wanted to ask her so many things in that moment.
Did she know what Adam was doing was wrong? Did she care about the institution of marriage? Had she ever loved me, even a little, or had I always been just an obstacle to her son's supposed greatness?
Did she understand that she was asking me to accept my own humiliation with a smile? But I didn't ask any of it. I just nodded and ate my pasta and let her think she'd won, that she had successfully managed the disposal of her son's inconvenient wife.
She then talked about Brittany some more, really selling me on this girl who was sleeping with my husband, detailing her attributes like she was reading a prospectus.
She's just so driven, Patricia gushed, so focused on success.
She reminds me of myself when I was young. Beautiful, ambitious, knows what she wants and goes after it. The implication was clear. Brittany was everything I wasn't. Everything I should have been. Everything Adam deserved. And she comes from such a good family, Patricia continued, lowering her voice slightly, as if sharing a valuable secret. Her father is a senior partner at Morrison & Associates.
Do you know them? Very prestigious firm. She went to Northwestern.
Dean's List every semester. She could have done anything, gone anywhere, but she chose to start at Adam's company because she's smart enough to know that's where the opportunities are, where the potential is. Every word was a knife, carefully placed.
Patricia was telling me that Brittany was superior, better educated, better connected, more ambitious, from a better family. She was pedigree. Everything Patricia had always wished Adam had married.
She sounds impressive, I managed to say, the compliment sounding utterly sincere. Oh, she is.
You know, Adam told me that working with her has been such a breath of fresh air. She's so engaged, so interested in his projects. She asks intelligent questions.
She challenges him intellectually. Another knife. Another reminder that I had failed to be interesting enough, smart enough, engaged enough. I had failed to meet the intellectual standard of the Richards dynasty. I paid for my own lunch.
Patricia didn't offer.
She never did. She left with a breezy, "See you when we get back, Sarah." When I got home, I looked at myself in the full-length mirror.
And for the first time in years, I saw the rage again, but it was overlaid with something colder. Dignity.
I looked at the woman who had been called low-maintenance and accommodating, and I smiled.
The revenge plan was no longer just about justice. It was about exposing the sheer, unadulterated contempt they held for me. It was about proving that the low-maintenance wife was actually the most dangerous woman in the room. The final hours before their departure were a theatrical masterpiece designed for an audience of one, me.
The day before they were due to leave, I performed the final acts of my master plan. I ensured they would not be traveling lightly.
First, I subtly ensured that Adam would not be checking his luggage in advance. I casually mentioned that the airline had sent a completely fabricated note about a temporary issue with their online check-in system for international flights, advising all passengers to confirm their seats at the counter to ensure their preferred seating could be honored.
"You know how important it is to get those window seats for the long haul," I'd said, scrolling innocently through my phone. He'd barely looked up from his iPad, murmuring, "Yeah, great. Thanks, honey. You're the best on the logistics."
Second, I packed his bag. Not his usual collection of breezy linen shirts, tailored shorts, expensive swim trunks, and designer resort wear.
Oh no.
For Adam's Landfill Recreation Center experience, I packed with an eye toward both survival and maximum discomfort.
I included 2 heavy wool sweaters I'd bought him years ago and he hated. One was a particularly hideous shade of mustard yellow.
The other a scratchy, moss-green monstrosity. Thermal underwear, the thick, unfashionable kind my dad wore for ice fishing. I chose a brand that felt like sandpaper.
One parka rated for -$40 circ text C dollar temperatures.
It was bulky, bright orange, making him highly visible in a gray,
desolate landscape, and covered in patches from a defunct local sporting goods store, the absolute antithesis of his usual subdued designer aesthetic.
2 pairs of industrial-strength waterproof boots that laced up to his knees and weighed a ton, designed for manual labor in slush, not walking on a beach.
Thick, reinforced gloves in a balaclava, ensuring he looked less like a corporate executive on holiday and more like an extra from a disaster movie.
The book A Brief History of Soviet-Era Waste Management, I found a used copy online with a cracked spine. I underlined key passages about the smell of methane and the prevalence of lead dust.
1 small bag of unappetizing,
nutrient-dense dry rations labeled emergency provisions, just in case the authentic local cuisine didn't meet his sophisticated standards.
This included hard biscuits and suspicious-looking cured meat.
For Brittany, I made some subtle, psychological additions to his carry-on, which I also packed for him, ostensibly to ensure he had reading material and snacks.
Hidden deep beneath his noise-canceling headphones and a thick Russian dictionary, which he would need, was a small, cheaply made, but very visible pamphlet titled, Norilsk, A Traveler's Guide to the World's Most Polluted City, a Study in Existential Isolation. And nestled in the side pocket, perfectly folded, was the coup de grace,
a brand new copy of the divorce petition, already signed by me, stamped by Diana Price, and notarized. A note was attached to the front page, written in elegant script on my personal stationery. "See you in court, Adam. P.S. Give Patricia my love.
And remember, darling, you're exactly where you deserve to be."
I did not pack any of these things in my own suitcase, which I had already discreetly moved to a storage unit I had rented across town, along with all my necessary documents and personal items. I was leaving the next day, right after I confirmed their flight had departed. On the morning of their departure, Adam was a flurry of self-important, manic activity. He was too excited and self-absorbed to notice the quiet efficiency of my movements. "Did you pack my prescription sunglasses, Sarah? The expensive polarized ones?" He barked from the bedroom, struggling with the massive, heavy parka I'd placed on his bed. "Yes, dear. In the side pocket of your carry-on, right next to the Russian phrasebook," I replied sweetly from the kitchen, where I was making him coffee, his last cup of coffee in a truly warm climate for a very long time. He came into the kitchen, smelling of his expensive cologne and a fresh layer of self-importance. "Good. And the resort confirmation? Did you print everything out?" "Don't want any mix-ups at the airport." I handed him a crisp folder containing all the expertly fabricated documents, the fake Maldives confirmations, the Aeroflot boarding passes showing their grueling 34-hour economy route to Norilsk, and the receipt for the Landfill Recreation Center premium experience. All of it looked exactly like the real thing, down to the security holograms I had painstakingly recreated with specialized foil tape. "Everything's there, Adam. All done. Have the time of your life. It's truly a unique opportunity." I made sure to meet his eyes, and I held the gaze longer than usual. It was the most honest look I had given him in years, a look of serene, terrifying finality. He seemed to sense something was off, but misinterpreted it completely, assuming my look was one of melancholy devotion. He leaned down and gave me a peck on the forehead, barely making contact. "Thanks, Sarah, you're the best. I know this is a busy time for you with your freelance work, but this trip is going to be a huge boost for my career. I'll call you when we land." The phone I still remembered the weight of, the phone that started all this, was now merely a prop in his self-centered life. "Don't worry about me," I said, my voice steady, clear, and utterly sincere. "I'll be fine, truly." I watched him load the absurdly heavy suitcase into the cab. Then Patricia and Robert pulled up in their luxury sedan, looking impeccably dressed for a tropical vacation. Patricia was wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat, a silk kaftan, and oversized Chanel sunglasses. Robert gave a curt nod, already focused on getting the luggage transferred and looking impatient with the entire endeavor. Patricia rolled down her window, her face flushed with excitement. "Sarah, dear, you're not coming to the airport?" "A shame, we were going to grab a final quick drink in the VIP lounge." "Oh no. Too much work, Patricia. A huge commission just came in, and I wouldn't want to get in the way of Adam's important networking time." Patricia smiled her triumphant, poisonous smile, adjusting her hat. "Quite right. Very sensible, Sarah. You're always so reliable. We'll send a postcard from paradise. You know, of the Overwater bungalows." "Please do," I said, waving with the perfect amount of false cheer and a hint of the accommodating wife sadness she expected. "Send one of the beautiful ones." And with that, they drove away. The three of them, Adam, Patricia, and Robert, off to their dream vacation in the Landfill Recreation Center. I walked back inside, closed the door, and let the smile fade, replaced by a deep sense of calm. The silence of the empty house was suddenly immense, but for the first time, it didn't feel lonely or daunting. It felt like space. It felt peaceful. I didn't move for 2 hours. I sat on the sofa, nursing my own cup of coffee, and watched the clock. I imagined them arriving at the airport, Adam flashing the fake documents, the clerk processing the boarding passes for their hellish 34-hour Aeroflot route to Norilsk. The moment they realized they were in economy class, packed in like sardines, instead of the business class one had originally booked, would be the first fissure in their fantasy. I imagined the moment Brittany, the ambitious and beautiful rival, realized she was spending 34 hours in economy next to a man who smelled like old wool and was carrying a Russian phrasebook and a heavy winter parka. Her enthusiasm for the career-boosting trip would start to wane somewhere over the Atlantic. The thought of Patricia and Robert expecting first-class service and a seamless quick flight to tropical luxury, only to find themselves routed through 3 continents and stuck in coach with substandard food and dubious sanitation, was a small, exquisite pleasure. At the scheduled departure time, I got the automated text from Adam's airline,
confirming the flight had left the gate. Success. My real work began.
I called Diana Price, my divorce attorney. "They're in the air," I said. "Start the clock." No communication until I give the word. "But the papers need to be filed immediately." "They've been filed, Sarah," she replied. "The moment you confirm departure."
The process server is already en route to the marital residence to confirm service of the documents there, and we've sent electronic copies to his work and personal email accounts.
He will be served the moment he is able to check his mail. Next, I called the property manager for the apartment I'd secured. "I'm on my way."
"I'll be there in an hour to pick up the keys."
I walked methodically through the house, collecting the few things I had left behind. My laptop, a box of my favorite pens, the few small pieces of art I'd purchased myself, and my passport.
I stripped the bedding off the master bed, leaving the mattress bare a blank slate.
I cleaned out my side of the closet, leaving a vast, echoing emptiness. I left no note, no trace of my planning, only the cold, hard evidence of my absence. Before I left the kitchen, I went to the fridge.
I took a small magnetic photo frame, a picture of Adam and me on our wedding day.
Both of us looking impossibly young and hopeful, and I tossed it in the trash bin, covering it with coffee grounds and fruit peels. Then, I wrote the final message on the dry erase board we used for groceries. The one Adam never looked at, but would be forced to read upon his return. Moved out. Contact my attorney Diana Price, for all future communication. Her number is Diana's phone number. I'll take the car. Don't worry about the Maldives. You're exactly where you deserve to be.
Sarah. I left the house key on the kitchen counter next to the note.
I got into my car, the old Honda Civic I'd bought before we met, which Adam had always insisted we should trade in for something more respectable, but which, unlike his expensive German sedan, was fully paid off and titled in my name, and drove away.
I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The past was behind me, and I was speeding toward the future. The next 48 hours were a blur of frenetic, productive energy.
Setting up my new life felt like building a fortress of solitude.
Unpacking boxes, changing my address with every utility and company, buying a cheap but comfortable new bed for my small, bright, and blessedly quiet apartment.
My new place was small, located in a diverse, vibrant neighborhood Adam would have deemed unsuitable, but it had large windows that let in all the light, and it was entirely, unequivocally mine.
Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Adam, Brittany, Patricia, and Robert were enduring a very different reality.
I had planned the timings meticulously. The total travel time, with layovers designed to be inconveniently long and in uncomfortable airports, Frankfurt,
then Moscow's oldest terminal, was calculated to exhaust them physically and mentally. By the time they landed in Norilsk, one of the northernmost cities in the world, infamous for its nickel mining pollution, its grim Soviet-era architecture, and its profound isolation, they would be operating on fumes, their bodies expecting tropical warmth and their minds expecting five-star service.
I imagined the initial shock at the tiny, frigid Norilsk airport,
where the air hits you with the metallic, sulfuric smell of industry and pollution.
The average temperature during their stay was forecasted to be -$15 circ tex C $2. $RY circ tex C $. Adam, in his light designer jacket and fashionable jeans, would be instantly freezing.
Patricia, in her linen kaftan and straw hat, would be visibly shivering, her carefully curated glamour dissolving in the icy air.
Robert would be struggling with the heavy luggage I had packed for Adam, all of it wildly inappropriate for the subarctic climate,
realizing too late that their own luggage for a tropical climate was utterly useless.
I imagined the moment Adam showed the Landfill Recreation Center booking confirmation to the transport driver. The driver, likely a huge stoic Russian man with zero tolerance for Western entitlement, would simply point toward an old, poorly maintained, unheated bus that smelled of diesel and body odor, then point to the heavy, insulated clothes in Adam's suitcase and gesture for him to put them on.
The clothes would be salvation and humiliation in one bulky orange package.
The drive to the Landfill Recreation Center would take hours, a slow, desolate journey through an utterly depressing landscape of industrial waste, dormant factories, and stunted frozen trees. This was not the postcard view of azure waters and white sand.
The Landfill Recreation Center's website was actually quite accurate in its horrifying descriptions. The average person would have questioned the entire booking. But Adam, blinded by his own desires and his faith in my administration, never questioned the name or the flight details. The moment they walked into the lobby, a cold, dimly lit room with peeling linoleum, bare bulbs, and a faint, pervasive smell of decaying waste and industrial chemicals would be the moment the elaborate fantasy I had constructed for them completely shattered.
The desk clerk would be an elderly woman with an expression of permanent exhaustion, demanding their papers in rapid Russian.
Adam's reaction. He would still be in a phase of frantic denial. He'd be on the phone, immediately trying to call the real Maldives resort, only to find the number I had fabricated was disconnected. He'd demand to speak to a manager, his entitled voice grating against the unflappable indifference of the Russian staff. He'd blame the travel agent, me, for a simple booking error, not yet realizing the sheer scale of the deception. The first sign of real panic would be the realization that his expensive credit cards were useless in this cash-only outpost. Patricia's reaction. Her outrage would be magnificent, a high-pitched, furious noise. She'd immediately start looking for someone to blame, her tropical print hat looking ridiculous against the gray walls. She would accuse the staff of incompetence, corruption, and an inability to recognize the importance of the family she was a part of. She would be yelling about international travel laws and compensation.
Brittany's reaction. The ambitious, smart,
and well-connected mistress would realize, perhaps before Adam, that something was profoundly wrong. This was not the glamorous, career-boosting vacation she'd been promised. This was a nightmare of epic proportions. This was not the environment for strategic networking. And she would quickly figure out that Adam was not the successful, detail-oriented man she thought she was hitching her wagon to. Her loyalty would instantly evaporate. It was during the initial chaotic check-in that Adam would finally be forced to open his carry-on to search for some other confirmation. He would pull out the Russian dictionary, the environmental pamphlet, and then, nestled right on top, the meticulously folded divorce petition. The signed, notarized documents, clearly visible, bearing the name of Diana Price. That's when the simple booking error would officially transition into a full-scale catastrophe. The realization that his wife had not only canceled the dream vacation, but had deliberately engineered this punishment and filed for divorce while he was airborne would hit him with the force of a frozen sledgehammer. I could almost hear the yelling. I pictured Adam finally confronting his parents, who would instantly turn on him, blaming him for trusting me in the first place. The recriminations would be intense, amplified by the cold, the hunger, and the existential dread. I had paid extra for them to suffer through the landfill premium experience, ensuring their misery was maximized for the entire 7 days. This package guaranteed zero comfort and maximum exposure to the facility's dubious charms. The authentic local cuisine, days of watery, suspicious gray stew, likely made from local vegetables and the cheapest cuts of mystery meat, served with hard black bread, all eaten in a dining hall where the heating was temperamental and the background music was traditional. Russian folk songs played on a cracked speaker. Brittany, the ambitious young woman who only ate organic, artisanal foods and drank filtered water, would be repulsed, likely surviving on the dry rations I had packed for Adam, if he was kind enough to share. The guided tour. A mandatory 4-hour freezing trudge through the vast, stinking landfill, where a relentlessly cheerful guide would explain the intricacies of 1970s Soviet recycling techniques and the various categories of environmental contamination. They'd have to wear the heavy, hideous, bright orange parkas I'd packed. I imagined Patricia having an immediate, severe allergic reaction to the dust and fumes, forced to walk through literal garbage, her silk kaftan hidden under the enormous coat. The accommodation. The heated room. Kept at the promised $13 circ text, C $55 circ text F $, with thin, scratchy state-issue blankets and shared bathroom facilities down the hall that smelled of mildew and had unreliable plumbing. I had booked them 2 rooms, Adam and Brittany in one, Robert and Patricia in the other, ensuring the couples would be exposed to the worst of each other in a profoundly uncomfortable environment. The lack of privacy and comfort would instantly make people turn on each other. The trip I had planned was a meticulously designed pressure cooker. Adam and Brittany, who only knew each other in the context of clandestine dates and shared professional ambition, would be exposed to each other's worst selves, cold, frustrated, hungry, and terrified in an environment that offered no escape. Patricia and Robert, who expected constant deference and luxury, would be stripped of their power and subjected to the same indignities as common tourists. And Adam, who had always relied on me to manage the details of his life, would be forced to take responsibility for a failure of epic proportions, all while facing a catastrophic divorce. The irony was perfect. The man who had treated his wife like garbage was now trapped in a garbage dump. The most satisfying part of my plan was not the revenge itself, but the resulting silence. For the next 7 days, my phone did not ring with Adam's number nor Patricia's. Why? Lack of signal. Norilsk is remote. I checked the cell coverage. It's patchy at best, especially at the Landfill Recreation Center. They would be lucky to get a text message out, let alone hold a sustained international call. The one working payphone would inevitably have a massive queue. Lack of funds. Adam was notorious for running up massive roaming charges. I knew he wouldn't use his phone for anything but the most desperate emergency call, because he'd assume I would be the one footing the bill, which I wouldn't be as I was no longer his emergency contact or his wife. The local currency situation would be confusing and challenging. The emotional barrage. The combination of cold, exhaustion, disappointment, the sulfurous smell, the terrible food, the shock of the divorce papers, and the realization that his wife was neither meek nor stupid, would render him temporarily speechless. He'd be too busy fighting with Brittany, who would be questioning his judgment and competence, defending himself to his parents, who would be questioning his ability to handle basic logistics, and desperately trying to find a way to leave Norilsk to call me and listen to my sweet, calm voice telling he was getting what he deserved. The fighting amongst the four of them would be constant and brutal. While they were suffering through their premium experience, I was settling into my new life, embracing the profound quiet. I changed the locks on my heart and the password on my email. I was getting my first full night's sleep in years, waking up naturally, without the dread of having to manage Adam's ego. I went to the grocery store and bought all the fresh, non-stew-related food I wanted. I started painting again, a hobby Adam had always subtly mocked as a frivolous waste of time. And the apartment walls, previously blank, began to fill with color and life. The day after I moved out, Diana Price called, confirming the filing and the service. "The papers are served," she said. He knows the situation. The ball is in his court, and he's currently in a place that severely limits his strategic thinking. Will they be able to leave Norilsk? I asked, purely for logistical clarity. They'll have to book new, very expensive last-minute flights, which Adam will have to pay for himself, likely through frantic calls to his business manager or friends. The credit card situation will be painful. And they'll have to abandon the Landfill Recreation Center booking, which was non-refundable. Everything they do will cost him money, prestige, and effort. Good. Every act of betrayal was now being paid for in the currency of his most valued assets, money and dignity. 7 days later, they were due to fly back. I imagined the return journey. Another 34 hours of freezing cold, shared body odor, simmering resentment, and the constant silent accusation between the four travelers. I had planned my final move for the day they arrived. I was waiting in the apartment with Diana Price, and we had a preemptive restraining order filed. I didn't want him showing up at my new place, or at the old house, trying to twist things back to the way they were. The moment he landed and his phone found a signal, the barrage began. The frantic texts, the accusatory emails, the voicemail messages that sounded less like my former husband and more like a desperate cornered animal. His first voicemail was pure, undiluted rage, full of background airport noise and what sounded like sniffing. "SRA? What the hell did you do? I'm calling the police. You hired a pie? What is this Siberian hellhole? I know you filed for divorce. You're going to pay for this. I'm suing you for everything you own. This is manipulation. This is insane." I listened to it with a sense of calm detachment, sipping a cup of herbal tea.
The rage was directed at me, but it was born from his own humiliation, his own exposure. He was lashing out because he was no longer in control, and the carefully curated image of his life was in tatters. I sent him one text message in response, and only one.
Crafted by Diana Price for maximum legal impact and minimum emotional engagement.
All future communication must go through my counsel, Diana Price. The cost of your Norilsk travel was a fee you paid for betraying me. Please be aware that your refusal to adhere to legal protocol will be noted. Sarah. I blocked his number and all social media accounts. The door was sealed.
The last piece of information I got was a text from a burner phone,
sent from Karin Chen, my investigator,
who was always thorough and now acting as my eyes and ears during the final chaotic airport scene.
Update on the Adam situation. He returned alone. Brittany left the group in Moscow and flew directly to her parents' house, filing for an immediate transfer out of his department, citing a hostile work environment. Patricia and Robert took a separate later flight to avoid being seen with him. He was seen at the airport buying an entire bottle of scotch and crying into his parka, sitting alone by the baggage claim. He looks terrible.
Good luck, Mrs. Richards. End of service.
I smiled. It was a genuine smile that reached my eyes and lifted the weight from my chest. A life reclaimed. I looked around my new, sun-drenched living room. I was free. The weight of the phone in my hand when I first read that text, that heavy, suffocating weight was gone. It had been replaced by a different kind of weight. The weight of my own agency, my own strength, and the quiet certainty that I was finally getting what I deserved. The divorce proceeded quickly, exactly as Diana Price promised. The documented infidelity, coupled with Adam's complete financial carelessness in trusting me with the vacation booking, put him instantly on the defensive. He had no moral ground to stand on, and no emotional support system, as Patricia was furious at him for the Siberian debacle and the public humiliation. Adam had to settle quickly, signing the papers with a defeated sigh, more concerned with salvaging his career than fighting for a house that now represented only shame. I received a generous settlement. The house sold, the money split, and I walked away with more than I ever would have asked for had I simply confronted him emotionally. I kept the Honda Civic, I kept the credit union account, and I kept my dignity.
Adam was left with his expensive German sedan, his tarnished reputation, and the lasting,
inescapable stench of Norilsk on his favorite parka. I never saw Adam or Patricia again. I changed my number, rebranded my graphic design business, and built a clientele that valued my precision and my lack of drama. I started dating again, eventually meeting a man who looked at me with genuine interest,
who asked about my art, and who appreciated my strength, not my silence.
The last thing I heard about Adam was an anonymous email tip from an old colleague. He'd been forced to take a demotion at work and was seen frequently having lonely dinners at the expensive restaurants he used to frequent with Brittany, still wearing that same expensive cologne, perpetually looking over his shoulder. He never did get that promotion. As for me, I learned that a little bit of rage, channeled with absolute precision and meticulous planning, could be the most powerful catalyst for a life worth living. I was Sarah, the architect of my own destiny, and I finally understood that low maintenance wasn't a compliment, it was a trap. And I was gloriously, visibly, free.
The moment the Civic pulled away from the curb of the house I had shared with Adam, the house that had been the cage of my invisible existence, the silence that fell was absolute.
It was the silence not of absence, but of completion. I had executed my plan flawlessly. I was neither jubilant nor distraught. I was simply free. The drive to my new apartment was short, yet it felt like crossing a major geographical boundary, traversing decades of lost time. My new neighborhood was nothing like the manicured, sterile suburbs Adam favored.
It was urban, bustling, alive with the sound of distant traffic, children's laughter,
and the complex smells of global cuisine spilling from small, independent restaurants.
It was real. The apartment was on the third floor of an old brick building. It was smaller than the master bedroom of the marital house, but every square inch was intentional. It was flooded with natural light, a stark contrast to the heavy, expensive drapes Adam insisted on,
designed to keep the world out. I collected the keys from the property manager, a cheerful, no-nonsense woman named Maria who gave me a firm handshake and told me to call if the radiator acted up, and opened the door. The first item I carried in was my laptop bag.
My personal and professional world was contained in that single object.
The rest of the day was dedicated to setting up security and communication barriers.
Phone lockdown. Adam's number was blocked across the board. I also blocked Patricia, Robert, and any of Adam's close business contacts. I enabled a highly specific call filter on my old number, rerouting all calls to Diana Price's office. I downloaded a temporary encrypted texting application for communicating solely with Karen Chen, my investigator, and Diana. My old life had no direct channel to my new one.
Digital scrub. I changed every password I owned, utilizing unique,
complex phrases that had nothing to do with Adam, our life, or any shared memory.
I audited my cloud storage, deleting any shared documents or photos that might betray my new location or contact information. I installed stronger firewall protection on my computer. I was eliminating the digital trail of Sarah Richards, the wife. Physical security. I taped the blinds shut while I settled in and immediately installed a simple,
high-quality deadbolt on the front door, feeling a profound sense of safety with the click of the lock.
That evening, I ate a simple meal of takeout faux spicy, aromatic, and comforting sitting on the floor because my furniture hadn't arrived yet. I wasn't just hungry. I was ravenous for a life I could choose. I read through the divorce documents again, Diana Price's summary notes providing a clear, dispassionate roadmap for the next stage. The paperwork felt like armor. I finally slept that night, truly slept, for the first time in years. There was no subconscious tension waiting for a late-night slam of the door, no low-level dread of criticism. Just the quiet hum of the city and the sound of my own steady breathing.
I woke up naturally, without an alarm, and drank coffee purchased from the vibrant cafe downstairs.
I felt alert, almost giddy with the simplicity of my surroundings. Today was the day Adam and his party would complete their grueling journey to Norilsk. I imagined the long hours on the regional carrier, the smell of cheap jet fuel and recycled air, the frustration of the inevitable delays in Moscow, the constant awareness of the freezing temperatures awaiting them. I imagined Patricia attempting to bully the Aeroflot ground staff, her imperiousness dissolving against Russian bureaucratic indifference. I turned my attention to establishing my professional routine. I emailed my few key freelance clients, informing them of my contact change and assuring them of continuous service. I started working on a complex logo design, immersing myself in the details, using my creativity not as an escape, but as a confirmation of my identity. The quiet was a deep well I could finally draw from. I realized I hadn't been able to think clearly or sustain a complex creative task in the marital home for years, constantly interrupted by Adam's demands or Patricia's intrusive phone calls.
Here, in this tiny sunlit space, my thoughts flowed freely.
Around 4 p.m., my phone vibrated with a cryptic message on the encrypted app. Arrival confirmed. Environment hostile. Thermal gear deployed. Conflict imminent. It was Karen.
I paused, leaning back in my chair.
Thermal gear deployed. That meant Adam and his cohorts had been forced to don the hideous, oversized orange parkas and the thick, scratchy wool. Patricia, the queen of high fashion, was wearing my dad's ice fishing thermals.
It was a minor, satisfying victory.
Conflict imminent. That was the real prize. The facade of Adam's competence and Brittany's devotion would be cracking under the
combined pressure of physical misery and the sudden realization that they were not in the Maldives.
I allowed myself a small, fierce smile. I worked late that night, fueled by creative energy and the knowledge that, for the first time, my energy was focused entirely on me. The third day was for administrative justice.
I spent the morning at the DMV, quietly updating my address and registering my car solely in my name,
finalizing the separation of my identity. In the afternoon, Diana Price called, her voice brisk.
Sarah, Adam's attorney, has received a petition.
They are predictably enraged.
They are characterizing the entire vacation cancellation as malicious, deliberate financial sabotage and emotional cruelty.
Which it was, I noted calmly.
Exactly.
But we have the documentation of the infidelity and Patricia's explicit knowledge of the affair. We're arguing that he engineered the trip for his mistress using marital funds, and you, as the financially prudent party, nearly prevented further theft of assets. The fact that the trip was booked in your name and paid for from your private savings is crucial. Is he back? No, that's the beauty of it. He's trapped.
His attorney is claiming he's incommunicado due to unforeseen international circumstances and requesting an extension. We are denying it. We want him to file his response while still in Norilsk, unable to access his documents or properly strategize with his team.
And Patricia?
She left a highly inflammatory voicemail for me. Claimed you were emotionally unstable and attempting to destroy her son's career. She called you that vicious little graphic designer. I took detailed notes.
Every instance of emotional abuse and contempt strengthens our case for a quick, non-contested resolution.
The term vicious little graphic designer was another perverse compliment. I had finally stopped being invisible.
I had earned Patricia's genuine hatred, and it felt like a badge of honor.
Later that day, Karen sent a photo. It was grainy, taken from a long distance, but unmistakable. They were standing next to the Welcome to the Landfill Recreation Center sign, which was partially obscured by thin brown slush. Adam's posture was rigid, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Brittany looked like she was actively crying into her balaclava. Patricia and Robert stood apart, looking utterly desolate. It was more satisfying than any Overwater bungalow photo could have been. I started unpacking the rest of my boxes, which had arrived the previous evening. The new apartment was now beginning to look like a home. I hung my own art on the walls, choosing bright, abstract pieces Adam had always dismissed as too chaotic. I also started running again. Adam had subtly discouraged my physical activities, saying he preferred a woman who didn't overdo it. Now, I ran through the neighborhood, feeling the cold, clean air fill my lungs, focusing only on the rhythm of my feet on the pavement. My body felt strong and responsive, no longer simply a vessel for his comfort, but a tool for my own freedom. I bought new furniture, simple, modern pieces I actually liked, rejecting the heavy, traditional tastes Adam and Patricia imposed on the marital home. I bought a small, bright red teapot. Simple things, but each item was a vote for my own taste. I spent the evening researching environmental policy in the Arctic region, a topic I had grown genuinely interested in after researching Norilsk. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was opening my mind to the world Adam had closed off. Karen's evening update was concise. Marital unit isolated.
Brittany observed initiating call to external number, likely family or friend, expressing distress. Arguments escalating.
Subject seen wearing book. Wearing the book? I texted back. The waste management book. He's wearing it inside his parka, presumably for extra chest insulation. Appears to be reading the chapter on industrial slag heaps. Morale low. I laughed out loud, a sound that felt foreign and beautiful in the quiet apartment. Adam, the corporate climber, using the history of Soviet trash as a personal chest plate. I met Diana Price for lunch. The topic, Brittany. Adam's attorney is trying to distance him from the Brittany situation, claiming she was a necessary professional acquaintance that got out of hand, an emotional mistake, not a planned affair. But Patricia confirmed her strategic value to me, I countered, recalling the lunch. She openly encouraged the relationship for networking purposes.
And that, Diana smiled, is why Patricia's deposition is going to be magnificent.
We've compiled all the group chat messages where they refer to Brittany as that girl or discuss her professional credentials. It clearly shows a family conspiracy to facilitate the affair. This makes Adam look even worse, like a puppet whose family actively managed his cheating for career gain. The narrative was shifting. Adam wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a corporate fraud who used his mistress as a networking tool, openly encouraged by his controlling parents.
I left the meeting with a new spring in my step.
I realized my revenge wasn't just about making them cold.
It was about destroying their most sacred currency, their carefully curated image of success and respectability.
That evening, Karen's update was chilling. Accommodation is poor.
Subject and Brittany observed arguing violently over blankets. Patricia demanding immediate contact with U.S. Embassy. Robert attempting to fix broken heater with a rock.
No successful contact attempts out of Norilsk yet. Subject is physically isolated and emotionally decimated.
I dedicated the 6th day to my freelance work, completing the logo project and sending the invoice to my new, independent account. The money felt cleaner, earned purely by my own effort. Midday, the blocked numbers on my old phone showed dozens of attempted calls. I knew Patricia was reaching a breaking point. Her power was built on her ability to command resources and attention. In Norilsk, she had neither. She was forced to rely on a broken man in an orange parka. I called Diana. Is there any legal reason I can't send a small symbolic gift? Diana considered this. As long as it's not harassment, no. But make sure it can't be construed as a threat or an attempt to communicate about the case. Make it anonymous. I immediately went online to a high-end gourmet food delivery service. I purchased an enormous, highly expensive tropical fruit basket: pineapples, mangoes, starfruit, and fresh coconuts. I sent it to Patricia and Robert's empty house, scheduling the delivery for the morning of the day they were due to land. The note was simple, printed on an anonymous card. Thinking of you during your long journey home. May your landing be soft and your memories of paradise be sweet. With best wishes, a friend. It was a perfectly crafted piece of psychological warfare, a reminder of the luxury they had lost, delivered to their desolate, empty home, just as they were stepping off a 34-hour economy flight from the toxic Arctic Circle. It was my final day in the quiet, empty cocoon before the chaos of the post-return divorce negotiations began. I spent the day cleaning the apartment, readying myself for the future. In the late afternoon, Karen's final full report came through the encrypted channel. It included a final photo. The four of them, standing on the tarmac in Norilsk, waiting for their flight out. Brittany was visibly distant from Adam, talking animatedly on her cell phone, likely a desperate call from a sliver of signal. Adam looked haggard, his face pale beneath the heavy hood. He was holding a plastic bag containing a rock from the souvenir shop. The last message in the body of the report summarized their final day. Observation concluded. Subject's departure from Landfill Recreation Center was chaotic. Brittany left the group first, chartering her own highly expensive transport back to the regional hub, making it clear she would not be continuing the journey with Subject. Subject, Patricia and Robert were forced to rely on regional bus service. The three were observed in a very loud, public argument regarding the expense of the new flights and the fact that Subject's documents were falsified, clearly indicating prior knowledge by spouse. Patricia was hysterical, screaming that Subject had ruined everything. Subject appeared defeated, accepting full blame for the logistical error. His reputation among his parents is destroyed. The marital unit is not only dissolved, but the family unit is fractured. End of service. I put the phone down, took a deep breath, and looked out the window at the setting sun illuminating the vibrant street below. He was landing soon. The rage, the humiliation, the shock all delivered on schedule. I was Sarah, the former invisible wife. And I was ready,